So thank you very much. Welcome back to our next video that we are going to look at the movement of the pollen grains. That is, we are going to look at the Brownian motion. We have said you put some water into a beaker, and then in that beaker you sprinkle some pollen grains as we have sprinkled here. Of course, we have the pollen grains and the water, and then you view the pollen grains on the surface using a microscope, which we cannot use right now because we are being taken by the video. But then we are going to show you how these pollen grains behave. So you cover that, then with the help of a handless or a microscope, you observe the behavior of those pollen grains. Now, our video is here. We are going to look at this video, which is giving us the observation of how those pollen grains behave. Okay, so look at, if we view carefully, we look at the way these particles are behaving carefully, because those particles we are seeing are the particles of pollen grains, the pollen grains. They are, at the background we have other particles which we cannot see, and those other particles we cannot see are the water particles. But how are these particles of the pollen grains behaving? You can see they are moving. They are moving in a constant random motion. They are dancing in the surface of the water. On the surface of the water, those particles are moving, and that is how we see them. They are moving continually, If you look at one particle, you will see that one particle is moving constantly. It does not rest. It is moving constantly. And that is how those pollen grains are moving on the surface of the water. Constantly moving. The question is, why are they moving constantly like that? The reason is because there are some other particles which you cannot see, which are hitting them, bombarding them all the sides, right, left, center, all the sides. They are hitting those particles in all directions, and therefore those pollen grain molecules or particles do not have a choice but to move right, left, center, all in all directions. And that is what we are calling Brownian motion, which was discovered by a person called Brownian. The particles are moving all over on the surface, moving in all directions. You can see this particle is moving, you can see this particle is moving, you can even see this bigger particle is also moving in all directions, left, right, and you can see even the smaller particles of pollen grains are still moving. Every other particle on the surface of the water is moving. And the reason is because these particles are being bombarded. They are being bombarded by tiny invisible particles of the water molecules. So the question and the answer that we can give ourselves to that motion is that the water particles are also moving in the same manner. They are also moving in the same manner. And because of their motion, they are hitting these particles, hitting them one to the right, another one to the left, another one to the northern direction, another one to the east, and so on and so forth. And therefore, those pollen grain particles have no choice but to move in a constant random motion. as it can be seen on the screen. So that is the motion that we can see when we have such a demonstration. We can see those particles moving in a constant random motion, and therefore this is a proof that matter is made up of tiny particles which are in individual level, tiny particles which are separated. But when we look at the matter as a whole, we see it as if it is a continual thing. It is all together, but inside there we have tiny particles which make up the matter, and that is why we are seeing it moving in that manner. So those particles are moving and moving in a continuous motion. In this case, it is just a demonstration of what we have seen, that if we have this pollen grain, the blacker one is the pollen grain, and we have some tiny particles which we are shown by those arrows, the tiny particles will be hitting this pollen grain in all directions. Eventually, this pollen grain will move to another position. Again, it will be hit by other water molecules which we don't see, which are also moving in a constant random motion. That pollen grain will move from that particular place to another position, and it will move to another position, so on to another position and another position. In other words, we are saying the pollen grain will be moving in a constant random motion from one point to another point to another point, and so on and so forth. Why? Because it is being hit, it is being bombarded in all directions by the invisible water particles. The water particles are also moving in a constant random motion. Constant random motion. So in this case, we can conclude that the pollen grains are seen to be moving in a constant random motion because they are continually being hit by tiny invisible particles of the water, which are also moving in a constant random motion. This kind of motion where particles that are visible are seen to be moving in a constant random motion because they are being hit by tiny invisible particles, is the one we are calling Brownian motion. Now, what are the properties of the particles that we can see, like the pollen grains? What particles should we what particles should we consider for those particles that we put on the surface of the water? Those particles, like the pollen grains, must be visible and they must be light. First of all, we must be able to see them, and then they must be very tiny. They must be very, very light so that they can be bombarded by the tiny invisible particles. Those are the two properties that we must consider for particles that we put on the surface of the water. They must be light, they must be visible. Okay, the functions of the hand lens or the microscope. The microscope or the hand lens, instead, we can use a hand lens or microscope. It is to magnify the pollen grains, to make them bigger so that we can see them. Make them bigger so that we can see them moving in that manner, in the motion which we are calling the Brownian motion. Secondly, what are the function of the pollen grains? What is the function of the pollen grains that we have put there? Function of the pollen grains is to show us the motion of the invisible water molecules. Because essentially we cannot see the motion of the water molecules. We cannot at all see. They are not visible. The water molecules are not visible. And they are in motion. But we want to see their motion. So we put the pollen grains to show us the motion of those invisible pollen, the water molecules. The transparent lid is to protect the grains, the pollen grains, from disturbance by wind that is moving around. So if we want to protect the pollen grains so that we can see essentially the motion of the water molecules, cover the experiment with a transparent lid so that no air will be able to disturb the motion of those pollen grains. So it is just to protect the pollen grains from disturbance by wind. And therefore, by this experiment or by these demonstrations, these two demonstrations, I am sure that we can explain that matter is made up of tiny particles. Matter is made up of tiny particles from all these demonstrations that we have given you. So thank you very much. We will look at next videos where we are going to explain more about matter being made up of tiny particles. Thank you.